The heat clung to everything like an invisible hand. It pressed into my skin, soaked through my shirt, and made my hair stick to the back of my neck before I even opened the car door. Summer in Texas was always brutal, but this day felt different. The air itself seemed angry, vibrating with a kind of heaviness I couldn't explain. I rolled my shoulders, trying to shake off the tension, but it only settled deeper the way silence settles between people who should love each other, but don't. We had been driving for hours, 3 long hours of silence that felt heavier than the heat. My mother sat in the passenger seat, tapping her fake acrylic nails against her phone screen in a nervous rhythm that made me want to scream. My father muttered under his breath every few miles, the sound more like static than words, but I knew they were about me. Everything seemed to be about me, my attitude, my resistance, my existence. Sometimes I wondered why I even agreed to go on these family outings. Maybe I forgot what it felt like to be the family ghost present, but never truly seen. Maybe I thought there was a chance, just one, where we could pretend to be normal. But then the silence would stretch, and I'd remember. When we finally pulled into the zoo parking lot, I squinted at the faded murals of lions and elephants painted on the cement walls. The bright colors had long since peeled under the sun, leaving the animals looking tired, half erased. My father killed the engine with a grunt. My mother immediately reapplied her lipstick in the visor mirror, not once looking back at me. Behind us, a sleek SUV door opened, and out stepped my sister Isla. She was radiant as always, her hair glossy like it had been conditioned with liquid gold, her fake tan glowing as though the sun had personally chosen her as its favorite child. Following close behind was her French bulldog Charlie. The dog waddled out in a rhinestone-studded harness and matching leash, panting in the heat like he was heading to a runway show instead of a zoo. Isla lifted him into her arms, crooning, "Did Hazel scare you, Charlie? Did she bump your carrier and make you upset?" I rolled my eyes, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Are you serious right now?" My mother finally looked up from her phone, her eyes narrowed. "Hazel, just apologize. He's sensitive." "He's a dog," I said, my voice flat. "He'll be okay." Isla gasped, as though I had slapped her instead of dismissing her dog. Charlie snorted, his squashed face trembling with every noisy breath. "That's exactly why no one likes you," Isla hissed, clutching the bulldog closer like he was a newborn child I had threatened. The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they were new, I had heard versions of them my entire life, but because of the sharpness in her voice. She meant it. She always did. My father slammed the driver's door shut and loomed over me like a shadow. "Hazel, you're always starting problems." I began, but my mother was already moving toward me. Her eyes were steel, her lips pressed tight. "Say sorry," she said. "Apologize to the dog." A laugh burst from my throat before I could stop it. "You want me to apologize to a chihuahua in a bow tie?" "He's a French bulldog and he has anxiety," Ella snapped. My mother's hand moved so fast I didn't even register the slap until my cheek lit up with heat. The taste of copper filled my mouth. The sound echoed across the parking lot, cutting through the normal zoo chaos of children laughing and birds screeching. A man paused mid-pump 2 rows over. Someone inside the snack shack dropped a soda can. For a moment, the world went quiet. Then my father chuckled, pulling out his phone as though nothing had happened. "Smile, Hazel. This'll make a great picture." The cruelty was sharp, deliberate, not careless. My father angled the phone camera toward me, grin spreading like this was a comedy sketch. My sister laughed too, hugging Charlie tighter. My mother just looked at me, eyes blank as though I had brought this on myself. I didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't scream. I turned my face away, letting the sting burn deeper. And then, as if it hadn't been enough, my mother's hand clamped around my wrist. "Maybe you'll learn some respect today." She yanked me toward the entrance. The zoo smelled of fried food and hot asphalt, but as we passed through the gates, the air changed. The reptile house loomed ahead, a long cement building with windows tinted so dark it looked abandoned. My mother's grip tightened as we approached, her nails biting into my skin. "Mom, stop," I said, trying to pull free. She didn't. Inside, the air was thick, humid, heavy with the musk of animals and heat lamps. The light was dim, tanks glowing with movement. Pythons, coiled lazily, rattlesnakes shifted in the sand, eyes unblinking. It smelled of damp straw and old stone. Before I could react, my mother shoved me through a half-open staff gate. I stumbled hard, catching myself on the concrete wall. My palms scraped raw. I turned just in time to see her smirk. "This is what happens when you disrespect family," she said, her voice low. Behind her, my father's laughter echoed. The click of his phone camera punctuated the sound, each shutter a cruel exclamation point. "Perfect," he said. "This one's going in the family album." Isla's giggle floated through the air. "Don't let her out until she says sorry." My chest tightened. The tanks around me hummed with life. A python's scales glimmered beneath the heat lamp. A rattler's tail twitched dry and sharp. My pulse hammered in my ears. I froze, hands pressed against the wall, the hiss of unseen snakes rattling through the dim light. For one long, endless moment, I thought they'd leave me there. Hey, what are you doing back there? The shout cracked through the air. A zookeeper rushed forward, keys jangling at his belt. His flashlight beam cut through the dim enclosure, landing on me. She wandered in on her own, my mother said quickly, pressing her hand to her chest in mock horror. She's always so careless, my father added. Tucking his phone back into his pocket, the grin still on his face. The zookeeper wasn't buying it. His eyes flicked from me, shaking, scraped hands, flushed cheek to them, their perfect performance of innocence. He frowned, unlocked the gate, and motioned me out. You can't be in there, it's dangerous, he said firmly, directing his words toward my parents. They nodded along, pretending to agree, but I knew better. They had meant for me to be in there. I didn't cry, didn't argue. I just walked past them, my chest hollow and burning. We spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the zoo, or rather they walked, and I followed at a distance. My mother chatted on her phone, my father bought a beer at the concession stand, and Ela posed for pictures with Charlie, angling the bulldog's rhinestone vest toward the sun. No one mentioned what had happened in the reptile house, but I remembered every second. The slap, the shove, the hiss, my father's laugh, my mother's eyes cold and pleased, my sister's smug smile as though she had won some private war. By the time we reached the exit gate, sweat rolling down my spine, I knew something had shifted. This wasn't just cruelty anymore. It wasn't just the usual humiliation I had swallowed since childhood. This was final. They had made it easy for me. I wasn't going to haunt them quietly anymore. That night, in a cheap motel with peeling wallpaper and a bed that creaked like it had secrets, I opened my laptop. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from focus, from decision. A folder sat on my desktop, untouched, unopened, labeled Isla's Life. I clicked it open. Inside, hundreds of files I had been collecting for years. Screenshots, bank transfers, photos, records. My sister's fake designer resale scams. My father's shell accounts registered under my name. My mother's church donations that coincided too neatly with international money transfers. I had noticed everything. They thought I was the ghost. But ghosts see everything. Now it was time to stop watching. It was time to strike. The motel room was a box of stale air and peeling wallpaper, but to me it felt like a war room. I sat cross-legged on the squeaking bedspread, laptop glowing against the dim yellow light of the ceiling fan. The slap on my cheek had already faded into a dull ache, but I touched it again, reminding myself it wasn't just pain. It was proof. Proof that my family had crossed a line they couldn't return from. Proof that they would rather laugh at me in front of snakes than admit I deserved respect. And if they thought that humiliation would break me, they had no idea who they had raised. For years I had stayed quiet. For years I had accepted scraps. I had been the shadow daughter, the one they kept around because it was easier than explaining why they wanted me gone. But a ghost remembers everything, and that night inside that motel with cracked plaster and buzzing neon, I decided that remembering was no longer enough. I opened the folder on my desktop, Isla's Life. The name had been a joke once, typed quickly during a late-night temp job when I had access to scanners and free time. I never expected it to grow into something that heavy, something that dangerous. But as the files stacked over the years, the joke turned sharp. It was no longer Isla's life. It was my weapon. The first file I clicked was a PDF of online receipts, purses, shoes, designer accessories, all claimed by my sister as authentic. I had proof of where they really came from: discount warehouses, shady suppliers, even counterfeit factories overseas. She had sold them at markup to her friends, bragging about her style, building her image on lies. Then there were the spreadsheets. My father's accounts. He had used my social security number to open a line of credit when I was 17. Back then, I thought it was a clerical error, some mistake the bank would fix. But when the bills kept coming, I realized the truth: my father had stolen my name before I was even grown. And to my mother, hers was the worst. She was active in her church group, always parading herself as generous, righteous, holy. Yet every monthly donation matched a suspicious spike in her personal bank account, as though her faith had suddenly become very profitable. Individually, these things looked like small sins. Collectively, they painted a picture of a family rotten to the core. I leaned back against the headboard, listening to the hum of the broken air conditioner, and let the anger settle into resolve. This was no longer about me apologizing to a dog, no longer about the slap, or even the snake house. This was about decades of being treated as less than human. The next morning, I picked up the phone. The first call was to a paralegal I had met during a short-lived temp job at a law office downtown. Her name was Marissa. She was sharp, underpaid, and quietly furious at the way the partners treated her. I remembered how she once told me, documentation wins wars. Forget emotions, get the paper. When she answered, her voice was groggy. Hazel, it's early. I need help, I said. I have documents, lots of them. She was silent for a moment. Documents on what? Fraud, theft, lies, my family. I could almost hear her sit up in bed. You're serious? Dead serious. Send me everything, I'll look. The second call was to a reporter I had worked under during an internship, Dana Reeves. She was the kind of journalist who hunted hypocrisy like it was blood sport. She wasn't afraid of powerful names, and she hated being lied to. Hazel Dana's voice was brisk, efficient. It's been years. I have a story, I said. Everyone thinks they have a story. Not like this. I took a breath. Fake designer scams, identity theft, church money laundering, all in one family. There was a pause. Then send me the files. If it checks out, we'll talk. The third call was the hardest, my old piano teacher, Miss Clara. She had been the only adult who saw me as more than a burden. After I quit lessons, we lost touch. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 10 years. When she answered, her voice was a soft whisper. Hazel, is that you? I swallowed hard. I'm ready. Her breath caught. Are you sure? I stared at my reflection in the motel mirror. Same brown eyes, same tired skin. But there was something new behind them. A sharpness. A weapon, not a wound. Yes, I said. I'm done being their joke. The plan didn't come together overnight. I spent days in that motel drinking cheap coffee, my laptop open until dawn. Every keystroke felt like laying a brick building something I had never allowed myself to imagine justice. Marissa helped me sort through the evidence, showing me which documents mattered legally and which would crumble in court. She taught me how to build timelines, how to link transactions, how to create a chain that no one could deny. Dana warned me to be strategic. The truth matters, she said, but timing matters more. You want maximum damage release when they're most vulnerable. And Miss Clara reminded me of something even more important. Revenge is not about screaming Hazel. It's about silence. It's about letting them choke on their own deeds. I listened, I learned, I sharpened. And slowly the plan took shape. I booked a return ticket. Not home, not to the house that smelled of perfume and bitterness, but to a nearby town where I knew they'd be for Isla's engagement party. She had rented a lake house to impress her fiancé's wealthy family. Private fancy staged like a magazine spread. Everyone would be there, my mother, my father, my sister, the dog and his rhinestones, everyone but me. Until I showed up. I didn't plan to walk in screaming. I didn't plan to throw papers in their faces. That would have been too obvious, too emotional. No, I would be quiet, patient, poetic, the way a ghost returns. On the day of the party, the lake was glassy, reflecting the sky in endless blue. Guests arrived in pressed suits and floral dresses, snapping pictures under banners with Isla's name printed in gold. Laughter carried across the water. Music drifted from the house. No one noticed me. I rented a kayak, slid it into the water, and drifted along the edges of the lake. Sunglasses hid my eyes. My paddle sliced through the surface in rhythm, steady and silent. From a distance, I watched. I saw my mother holding a wine glass, gossiping loudly, pretending she hadn't slapped her daughter into humiliation a week ago. I saw my father laughing with Ila's future father-in-law, spinning lies about real estate, puffing his chest like he was a genius. I saw Isla glowing in her designer dress, fake tan, shining smug as ever. And then I saw the dog, Charlie, perched on a cushion at the private dock, chewing an overpriced biscuit like a king. That was when I heard my name. Hazel. I turned. Miss Clara stood at the edge of the dock, her blue dress rippling in the breeze. She held a bag in her hands. I paddled closer, climbed onto the dock, barefoot, water dripping from my legs. She opened the bag and pulled out a thick yellow envelope. Inside were notarized copies of everything. Every lie, every scam, every stolen number, every fake transaction. It was time. I placed the envelope on the cushion next to Charlie. The dog sniffed at it, then went back to chewing. I walked away. Behind me, I heard it. Who put this here? My father's voice. Then Isla's panicked cry. This is fake. This is all fake. Then the crash of a chair. I didn't look back. Miss Clara was waiting in her car beyond the trees. She didn't speak as I climbed in. She didn't need to, because the screams echoing behind us were enough. They tried to spin it, of course. They always did. Within hours, Isla was scrubbing her social media, deleting every picture with her fiancé. My father was on the phone, calling everyone he knew, insisting it was a misunderstanding. My mother claimed the documents were forged. But the timing destroyed them. Because while they were scrambling, I had already sent a second envelope to someone else, Chase's older sister, Amelia. A woman with a nose for dishonesty and a hatred for liars. She didn't wait 24 hours. She showed everything to her family. And by that night, Isla's $30,000 engagement ring was clattering across the floor while Chase shouted, "So, this is what your family taught you." The wedding was called off. The business partnership Ela had been cultivating collapsed. And just like that, my sister was back where she started living with my mother in a dying rental, selling knockoff bags online, pretending nothing had happened. But for me, it wasn't enough. They never apologized. Not for the slap, Not for the snake house, not for the years of treating me as less than a dog. So I planned something more, something final. The lake house chaos was only the beginning. Isla's engagement dissolved in less than 24 hours. My father's business partners stopped returning his calls. My mother's church group donations were flagged for review. They scrambled, but scrambling only made them look guiltier. They weren't used to losing. They weren't used to being seen. For me, though, the victory felt unfinished. Watching them unravel from a distance was satisfying, yes, but it wasn't complete. They had humiliated me publicly, shoved me toward danger, laughed while I stood among snakes. They had treated me as a family joke for a lifetime. Justice from afar was not enough. I wanted them to look me in the eye when I ended it. I waited 3 weeks. Long enough for Isla's breakup to sting, long enough for my father's reputation to take a hit, long enough for my mother's church whispers to grow. Then I made the call. Lunch, I said into the phone, my voice calm. My mother sniffed on the other end. Why would we meet you, after everything you did? I want to clear the air. There was a pause, and then my father's voice cut in sharp and suspicious. Where? Whoosh. Downtown diner, tomorrow at noon. I hung up before they could argue. The diner was ordinary red vinyl booths, laminated menus, the smell of fried onions clinging to the air. I arrived early, chose a booth near the window, and ordered a plain coffee. No makeup, no jewelry, just a simple gray sweater. I wanted to look like the Hazel they remembered, the quiet one, the doormat. They arrived late, of course. My mother swept in with oversized sunglasses, my father trailing behind, his jaw tight. They slid into the booth across from me. Why'd you call us here? My father asked, not even pretending to greet me. I smiled faintly, just wanted to talk. My mother scoffed. After ruining your sister's future, after embarrassing us. Ruining. I raised an eyebrow, didn't realize telling the truth could ruin anything. Her lips thinned. My father drummed his fingers against the table. The silence between us was thick, brittle. I actually wanted to give you something, I said. From my bag, I pulled out a small velvet box and set it on the table. My father frowned. What's that supposed to be? My mother opened it, and for the first time in years, her face went pale. Inside was a dog tag. Silver. Engraved, if found, return to family. Real ones. It had been made for Charlie when I was 5. I remembered crying when I first read it because I thought it meant I wasn't part of the real ones. Now I slid it toward them and smiled. You know I always wanted to be found. I kept hoping you'd come around. Love me the way you loved Ela. Even the way you loved that damn dog. Neither of them spoke. My father's jaw worked, but no words came. But I don't want to be found anymore, I said softly. From my bag, I pulled a second envelope. This one was thicker, stamped legal. I placed it on the table and pushed it across. What is this? My father asked, a voice tight. Termination of parental rights. Symbolic, of course. I'm old enough that it doesn't mean much legally, but it's official. You're no longer listed as my next of kin. No power of attorney, no medical contact, nothing. My mother gasped. You can't do that. Oh, I can. I already did. You don't exist to me anymore. Not even on paper. My father shoved back from the booth. You're insane. No, I said, standing calmly. I'm free. I placed cash on the table to cover their untouched drinks, then walked out. This time, they didn't follow. They didn't yell. They just sat there, the weight of my absence pressing harder than any words could. The months that followed were not easy, but they were mine. I moved to another state, rented a small apartment with peeling paint but sunlight pouring through the windows. I took a job at a nonprofit music program teaching piano to kids who had been told they were worthless. I saw myself in them not because they were broken, but because they were brilliant and ignored. One little girl, Leah, had fingers too small to stretch certain chords. One afternoon, frustrated, she threw her hands onto the keys and said, "My fingers are useless." I knelt beside her. "No, sweetheart, your fingers are a gift. You just haven't found the right song yet." When she smiled, something in me healed. I thought of that piano back home, the one Isla had slammed shut on my hands when I was 8, laughing as she told me my fingers had no purpose. My parents had watched, dismissing it as sibling play. For years I believed her. For years I thought my hands were only meant to serve, to carry to work, never to create. But watching Leah, I knew the truth. Our hands are meant to build, not beg. And I would never beg again. Every so often I would hear news about them. Isla tried to rebuild her social media image, but whispers of the fraud followed her everywhere. My father scrambled to keep his accounts intact, but creditors circled like vultures. My mother's church circle grew smaller as questions about her donations refused to fade. They never called me, never reached out, and for once I didn't care. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't living as their shadow. I wasn't living as their ghost. I was living as myself. On quiet nights, I still replayed the zoo in my head. The slap, the shove, the snakes, my father's laugh. But now the memory no longer hurt. It fueled me, because in that moment they thought they had broken me. Instead, they had freed me. They had handed me the reason to burn their lies to the ground. And I did. Freedom did not arrive in a single day. It arrived slowly like morning light creeping under a door. For weeks after that diner confrontation, I kept waiting for my phone to ring, for my parents to call with threats or tears. But the silence was louder than any outburst. They had nothing left to hold over me. I thought that silence would bring peace. And in a way, it did. My mornings were no longer filled with dread of family messages or guilt trips. I walked to work through streets lined with oak trees, the leaves rustling like applause. The nonprofit music program paid little, but it filled me with something I had never known: purpose. Still, the past has a way of echoing. Every time I heard the clink of piano keys, I remembered Isla slamming the lid on my hands. Every time I watched children laugh without fear, I remembered being shoved toward the snake enclosure. And every time I looked in the mirror, I saw the cheek where my mother's hand had left its mark. Healing, I realized, was not erasing the echoes. It was learning how to live with them. Leah was 8 years old, small for her age, with a stubborn streak that reminded me of myself. She had trouble stretching her fingers across octaves, and frustration often made her slam her tiny fists onto the keys. One afternoon, she threw herself back on the piano bench, scowling. "I can't do it. My hands are useless." Her words hit me like a ghost from the past. I knelt beside her, meeting her eyes. "No, Leah. Your fingers are a gift. You just haven't found the right song yet." She frowned, unconvinced. So I placed my own hands on the keys and began to play a simple melody, one that only required small stretches. Her eyes lit up as she realized she could follow along. We played together side by side, her laughter breaking through the stale air of the practice room. In that moment, I understood something I had missed all my life. My hands were never useless. They were weapons when I needed them, and instruments when I chose them. And if my parents had tried to convince me otherwise, that was their failure, not mine. The city I moved to was large enough that I thought I could disappear. But ghosts don't just haunt houses, they haunt memories. One Saturday, walking through a farmer's market, I caught a glimpse of my father across the crowd. He was standing by a stall of overpriced leather goods, arguing with a vendor. His hair had thinned, his posture stooped. He didn't see me, but I froze, watching him gesture with the same arrogance that had once made me flinch. I turned away before he could notice me. But the encounter left me rattled. Even in ruin, he still looked like someone who believed the world owed him something. Later that night, curiosity got the better of me. I searched his name online. What I found made me laugh bitterly. Lawsuits, debt collectors, former business partners calling him a fraud. For the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt distance. He was no longer the towering shadow in my life. He was just another man crumbling under the weight of his lies. News of Hila came through whispers and social media scraps. Her engagement was over, her fashion brand launch dead before arrival. Pictures of her in rented clothes had been exposed. Screenshots of her fake designer resale scams floated around online forums. At first, she fought back, posting teary videos claiming she was being bullied. But the internet is merciless. Every lie she had told became a punchline. Within months, her accounts went dark. I didn't rejoice. Not exactly. Watching her collapse was like watching a tower fall that had been built on my back. It was inevitable, but still jarring. Some nights, I remembered her laughter at the zoo, holding Charlie, as if the dog's discomfort mattered more than my safety. I wondered if she ever thought about that day. If she ever realized she had cheered while our parents shoved me toward venom. Probably not. Isla's world had always been made of mirrors that reflected only herself. The hardest ghost to face was my mother. Her church circle had begun asking questions. Donations that didn't add up. Withdrawals that coincided with supposed acts of charity. She doubled down at first, painting herself as a victim of slander. But faith communities are fragile. Once trust cracks, it shatters. A former friend of hers reached out to me anonymously through email. "I don't know if you care," the message read, "but your mother has been barred from the women's ministry. People are talking." I read the email 3 times, my chest tight. Part of me wanted to feel triumph. But another part, the child who had once wanted her approval, felt only hollow. She had chosen money over honesty, image over love. And now she was losing the very stage she had worshipped on. One evening, I sat alone in my apartment, the piano keys beneath my fingers. I played softly, a song I hadn't touched since childhood. Notes filled the room, weaving through the quiet, wrapping around me like a shield. For the first time, I didn't hear my mother's criticism or my father's laughter or Hila's sneers. I heard only music, my music. I realized then that revenge had given me freedom, but healing required more. It required choosing who I wanted to be, not just who I refused to become. And I wanted to be someone who built, not someone who begged. Someone who taught children like Leah that their hands, their voices, their very existence mattered. Months later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper handwritten in my mother's looping script. Hazel, we don't understand why you've turned against us. Family is supposed to forgive. You've made us out to be villains. You've humiliated us. But despite everything, you're still our daughter. Come home. I stared at the words until they blurred. For a moment, my hands trembled, the old pull of guilt rising. But then I laughed. Come home to what? To snakes, to slaps, to mockery dressed as love. Home was not a place where I had been caged. Home was the life I was building now, note by note, free of their poison. I folded the letter, slipped it back into the envelope, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk. Not as a keepsake, as evidence. Proof that even in collapse, they still believed they had ownership over me. They were wrong. The nonprofit grew. More kids enrolled, more families reached out. We didn't have much secondhand instruments, chipped music stands, but the sound of children learning filled the rooms like sunlight. I poured myself into teaching. Each child carried their own echoes, parents who didn't listen, teachers who dismissed them, a world that told them they were small. I made it my mission to replace those echoes with new ones. Notes of possibility, songs of resilience. When Leah performed her first recital piece, her tiny fingers shaking on the keys, I sat in the front row, tears stinging my eyes. She finished, bowed shyly, and looked at me with a smile that said I did it. And I whispered back, yes, you did. In her triumph, I found my own. Yet deep inside, a part of me remained restless. My parents had lost status, Isla had lost face, but none of them had said the one thing that mattered. I'm sorry. They would never give it. I knew that, but sometimes late at night, I imagined confronting them one final time. Not with documents or legal envelopes, not with slaps of truth, but with silence so heavy it would crush them. Because silence, I had learned, is the loudest sound when it comes from someone you can no longer control. By the time autumn rolled around, the trees outside my apartment blazed in shades of gold and rust. The air carried the crisp bite of change. Every morning I walked through the park to work, crunching leaves underfoot, breathing in freedom like oxygen. For the first time in 25 years, I was building a life that belonged to me. But freedom is complicated. It is not just walking away, it is cutting chains you did not know were still tied to your ankles. Some chains are obvious, the slap across the face, the shove into the snake pit, the words spat like venom. Others are subtle, buried in memory, waiting to pull you back when you least expect it. I thought I had broken them all. I was wrong. It came on a Tuesday evening, just as I was locking up the practice rooms at the nonprofit. My phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then I answered. Hazel Cole, a man's voice asked. Yes. This is Detective Ramos with the County Sheriff's Office. We need to ask you some questions regarding financial accounts in your name. My chest tightened. Account? Yes, ma'am, there are discrepancies. We'd like you to come in tomorrow. I knew before he finished. My father. Of course it was my father. He had stolen my name once before, back when I was 17. Now he was dragging me into the fire again. Fine, I said. My voice was calm, but inside I was already burning. The next morning, the sheriff's office smelled of coffee and dust. Detective Ramos was polite but firm, sliding papers across the desk. Hazel, are these your signature? I stared at the documents. Loan applications, investment accounts, thousands of dollars all under my name. No, I said flatly, those are forged. Do you know who might have used your identity? I looked him in the eye. Yes, my father. The detective scribbled notes. Do you have proof? I smiled coldly. More than you'll ever need. That night, I dug into my laptop again, into the folder I had started years ago. Isla's scams, my mother's money laundering, they were already exposed. But my father's thefts had never been fully documented in legal language. I worked until dawn, cross-referencing bank statements, matching signatures, pulling receipts. Every page I compiled was another nail in his coffin. Every timestamp was another weight against his name. By sunrise, I had built a timeline so precise it could have been a map. From the first fraudulent credit line he opened when I was 17 to the most recent loan just 2 months ago. All of it tied neatly to his hand. I called Marissa, the paralegal who had helped me before. She met me in a quiet cafe, files spread across the table like playing cards. You weren't exaggerating, she said, flipping through the pages. This is fraud. Identity theft? Multiple counts. If the sheriff's office has half a brain, they'll bury him. Then why don't I feel satisfied, I asked. She looked at me, eyes steady. Because satisfaction doesn't come from punishment. It comes from closure. You don't just want him exposed, you want him to admit it. I laughed bitterly. He never will. Then you need to decide, she said. Do you want to chase an apology or do you want to be free? Her words stuck with me. 2 days later, a message popped up on my phone. It was from Isla. Hazel, please. Mom's not doing well. Dad says you're trying to destroy us. Just stop, please. I stared at the words, my stomach twisting. Isla begging me. The same sister who had laughed as I was shoved toward snakes. The same sister who had cheered when I was slapped across a gas station lot. I typed 3 words and hit send. It's the truth. No reply came. Weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. Summons, my father was being investigated for fraud and I was a key witness. I sat at my kitchen table, the paper trembling in my hands. This was it. The final chain. The courtroom would be the stage where everything played out. And for once, I would not be the ghost in the corner. I would be the voice. The courtroom was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. My father sat at the defense table, suit too large on his frame, eyes still defiant. My mother sat behind him, lips pressed into a thin line, refusing to meet my gaze. Isla was absent. When the judge called my name, I walked to the witness stand, heels clicking against the floor. My hands didn't shake as I swore the oath. State your name. Hazel Cole. The prosecutor smiled gently. Miss Cole, can you tell the court how your name and identity were used without your permission? I opened the folder, the same one that had lived on my laptop for years now, printed and notarized. Here, I said, holding up the first page. When I was 17, my father opened a credit line using my social security number. I did not authorize it. Here is proof of the account, here is proof of my age at the time, and here is his signature in his handwriting. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My father shifted in his seat, but said nothing. Page after page, I laid it out. Every fraudulent loan, every account, every forged signature. My voice was steady, my heart calm. I was no longer their scapegoat. I was their reckoning. It took hours, but the judge's decision was clear. My father was guilty of fraud, guilty of identity theft, guilty of using his daughter's name as a shield for his greed. When the gavel struck, my mother finally looked at me. Her eyes were wet, but not with remorse. With rage. She mouthed the words, "You'll regret this." I almost laughed. What could she do now? My father was led away in handcuffs. The sound of chains clinking was the sweetest music I had ever heard. The weeks after the trial were quiet. Too quiet. Isla vanished from social media entirely. My mother stopped sending letters. The silence stretched, but unlike before, it no longer weighed on me. Because this time the silence was not mine to carry, it was theirs. I played piano more often, teaching Leah and the other children songs of triumph. Each note was a declaration I survived. I overcame. I am free. One evening, as the sun set beyond the park, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea. The air smelled of autumn leaves and wood smoke. I thought about the girl I had been slapped into silence, shoved towards snakes, mocked as less than a dog. And I thought about the woman I had become, armed with truth, fueled by resilience, standing in court without fear. The chains were gone, all of them. And for the first time, I whispered, not to my parents, not to my sister, but to myself, I'm proud of you. When winter came, the city transformed. The leaves that once blazed gold were gone, replaced by bare branches that reached into a sky the color of pewter. The air turned sharp, cutting into lungs with each breath. I used to hate this season. It had always felt lonely, a reminder that warmth was for other people, not for me. But now the cold no longer pressed me down. Instead, it felt like a clean page. The trial was behind me. My father was in custody awaiting sentencing. My mother had withdrawn into whatever corner of life still tolerated her. My sister was a ghost online, her name tied forever to scandal. The silence from them was final. For the first time, my story no longer revolved around theirs. My life was no longer a reaction to their cruelty. It was my own melody, unbroken, unfinished, waiting for me to write it. I found a small apartment above a bookstore, the kind with creaking floorboards and windows that rattled in the wind. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. I painted the walls a warm cream set, a secondhand piano by the window, and filled the shelves with sheet music. Every evening after work, I would sit at that piano and let the notes drift into the street. Sometimes neighbors paused outside to listen. Once the woman who owned the bookstore left a note under my door that simply said, "Thank you for the music." It was the first time in my life I felt like my presence added to the world instead of taking from it. The nonprofit's winter recital was held in a drafty church basement decorated with paper snowflakes and strings of cheap lights. Parents crowded onto folding chairs, their faces bright with nervous pride. Leah was the final performer. She walked to the piano with trembling hands, glancing at me in the front row. I gave her a nod. She sat, adjusted the bench, and began to play. The first few notes were hesitant, but then her fingers found their rhythm. She played with strength, her small body swaying with the music. When she struck the final chord, the room erupted in applause. Leah looked up, her smile wide, her eyes shining. For a moment, I saw myself not the girl shoved into shadows, but the girl I had wanted to be all along. And in that moment, I knew my revenge was complete. Not because my parents had fallen, but because I had risen. Over the next few months, letters trickled in from my mother. She wrote about her loneliness, about how everyone had turned against her, about how I had abandoned the only people who truly loved me. Each letter ended the same, "Please come home." I never replied, not because I hadn't read them, but because I finally understood that her definition of home was a prison. A place where I was only valuable if I bent, if I bowed, if I apologized to dogs in rhinestone vests. I burned the last letter in a small dish by the window, watching the paper curl into ash. The smoke rose like a ghost, then disappeared. One evening in early spring, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar account. "Hazel, it's Isla. Please, I need help." I stared at the words, memories flooding back, the slap at the gas station, the laughter at the zoo, the smugness at the lake house. For years I had wanted her acknowledgement, some sign that she understood the harm she had done. Now here it was, not in an apology, but in desperation. I typed a reply slowly, "Help with what?" Her answer came minutes later, "Debt. They're coming after me. I don't know what to do." I closed my eyes, exhaling. Isla still chasing money, still trapped in lies, still expecting someone else to clean up the mess. For a long time, I sat at my piano, fingers hovering over the keys. Then I wrote back, "I can't save you. Save yourself." And I blocked the number. It hurt, but it was the cleanest cut I had ever made. In June, my father was sentenced. 5 years in prison for fraud and identity theft. I didn't attend the hearing, but a reporter I trusted sent me a copy of the court transcript. When asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, he claimed he was a victim of circumstance. He said he had only done what he did to support his family. Not once did he say my name, not once did he apologize. I closed the transcript and set it aside. His silence was no longer a wound, it was proof. Proof that nothing I had lost was worth holding on to. By summer, the nonprofit had expanded. We received a grant, only a few $1,000s, but enough to buy new instruments and repair the roof. I spent my evenings teaching children chords and scales, but also resilience and patience. Music isn't about perfection, I told them one day. It's about persistence. It's about choosing to keep playing even when your fingers stumble. They nodded, some understanding, some not yet ready. But I knew the message would echo in them one day the way piano keys echoed in me long after I left my family's house. In late August, I received an invitation in the mail. It wasn't from my family. It was from the nonprofit board inviting me to a gala celebrating our work. For a moment, I hesitated. Galas had always been my mother's world, my sister's arena of fake smiles and designer gowns. But this was different. This was built on truth, on community, on survival. I went. The ballroom was modest compared to the places my family used to flaunt themselves, but it glowed with sincerity. Children I had taught performed on stage, their music weaving through the crowd. Parents shook my hand, thanking me for giving their kids confidence. For the first time, I stood in a room where every person was glad I was there. On the night of the gala, as I walked home under strings of streetlights, I realized the final truth. Revenge had given me back my voice, but forgiveness, not of them, but of myself, had given me peace. I would never get an apology. I would never be loved by them the way I deserved. But I had built a life where that no longer mattered. I sat at my piano by the window, the city buzzing outside, and played a song I had written for myself. A song of endings and beginnings. Each note was a promise: I will not be silent, I will not beg, I will not be broken. And when the last chord rang out, I whispered into the empty room, "Goodbye." Years later, people would ask me why I didn't write a book about what happened. Why I didn't go public with every detail, make headlines, cash in on the drama. I always answered the same way, because my story isn't about them. It's about me. And then I would return to the piano, to the children, to the music. Because that was my revenge, that was my freedom, that was my life.